Good morning, everyone. I can see in the participants section that we have people joining us, so it looks like everything is working. Could you do me a favor and just in the webinar chat, make sure that I want to make sure that you can hear me. So just type type in the message chat that you can hear me okay and see us okay. Okay, great. I can hear you. I can see you. Wonderful. Hello, everybody. A brief introduction. My name is Shannon. I am the founder of Bargain Homes Abroad. I am so excited about today because this is something I've been looking into for years now. And then when the news broke at the beginning of April that this was actually put into law, the digital nomad visa for Italy, I was thrilled. I immediately reached out to Metta about this, knowing that he would be a great resource to come on and talk to us about it. And I know that a lot of you are excited about this too. So I want to introduce Metta. It is my pleasure to have him here and speak to us today and answer questions. I'm going to do a little bit of kind of housekeeping. I have a list of questions here. This is going to be interview style where we're going to talk about this. If you have questions, I would just ask that you put them in the Q&A box so that I can track them separately from the chat because sometimes they get lost in the chat. So if you could do that, we will hopefully have time at the very end to answer any outstanding questions if we don't address them in my little notes and cheat sheet here. So with that said, Nick, welcome. I want to just have you give a brief introduction of who you are and where you're from, and then we'll go from there. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shan. And it's a pleasure to be with you here in this webinar and to talk about this digital nomad visa program. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I am an Italian attorney licensed in Italy. I was born in Italy, in Bari, Puglia, and then I trained and practiced in Rome with an American law firm. And then I studied in Milan too, and I did my voluntary military serving with the Italian tax police called Guardia di Finanza. I wanted to see what they would say on the other side, how they would look at things on the other side. And then I went into my own practice where we built the international practice to assist experts from around the world who do business in Italy, people who move to Italy, buy homes in Italy, inheritance, basically pretty much that. So I currently live in the US where I moved about 13 years ago with my family. And my wife is American. I am a dual citizen. And so I divide my time between Italy and the US, switching tax residency between the two countries as life happens. COVID, I spent a year in Italy, and then we moved back to the US. So everything I do, everything I work on is pretty much a reflection of my personal life with investments across the oceans and estate planning, cross-border matters that have affected my personal life pretty much the entire adult life. So that's pretty much about me.
Great. Okay, so let's dive in and talk a little bit of kind of a brief overview of the historical options for folks who are looking to either do something beyond the short-term kind of tourist stay, which is in the Schengen zone, which is 90 days out of every 180. Maybe touch a little bit on the kind of the rules of that, what the historical options were, and then we'll get into the new option that just started this April.
Sure. Yeah, sure, definitely. So there are many countries in Italy that have a passport that allows their citizens to spend up to 90 days within Schengen within any time of 180 days. So basically, if you are, for example, a US passport holder or a British passport holder or Australian, you can just jump on a flight, go to Italy, and do that as many times as you want. As far as when you look back at the past 180 days, the count of days that you have spent in Italy, or even just a portion of, counting also a portion of days, is no more than 90 days. So that is the general rule if you don't have a visa. Now, if you're not a citizen of a country that is part of this so-called visa waiver program that allows you to jump on a flight and just go there for 90 days, then you would need a tourist visa to even just go to Italy for 15 days. For example, a person from China would need that, or a person from Russia would need a tourist visa to go to Italy. So there are many people who from the countries that can enjoy the visa waiver, where that love spending more than just 90 days within, Italy, and so they have in the past looked for ways around the how to satisfy that need. So if you don't qualify for the standard option, which would be usually the elective residency visa, um, that requires you not to work and requires you to have a specific type of income supporting your life while being in Italy, then people in the past used to go with student visa sometimes, solution like that. And some of the times they would just give up the idea of spending more time in Italy, because really Italy doesn't have an extended tourist visa. And some Italian consulates even have specifically expressly mentioned on their website that Italy doesn't have an extended tourist visa. So the other options that some people could pursue is the so-called golden visa. So if you wanted to invest in some Italian treasury bonds or Italian businesses, then you could get a visa that would allow you to be in Italy. But that type of visa implicates such a huge investment in terms of financial resources that unless you really have, 300,000-400,000 euros to spare, because the type of restrictions they put on the type of investments are such that they usually are not great investments. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a costly upper option. Other options are more appealing for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too, because I get asked this question all the time. Purchasing a property does not give you any kind of legal rights to stay in Italy beyond the 90 days. So that's why this digital nomad visa could be a really exciting option for people who aren't either retired and living off of passive income, or a student, or have a large amount of money to kind of, invest into a business or something like that. So let's go into what exactly is the digital nomad visa?
Great. Yeah. So the at the government level, they had been talking about this for a while, and traditionally it used to be a pretty highly politicized topic. So that's why the drag. Finally, a couple of years ago, the Mario Draghi government finally issued the law, and everyone was so excited. But there was a final line in the law, literally saying this law will be enforced after the peripheral government branch that takes care of the execution and operative nodes. It will issue the decree that will say exactly what the requirements are and how it should work. So everyone got excited, but there was that but at the end. Okay, Italy has one, but let's wait for the instructions. Okay, so after 2 years, literally, the government issued the operative notes, the regulations, and to apply for the visa, and it also that came out almost unexpectedly, and so I'm saying that because many Italian consulates spread throughout the world um, are not prepared. I'm not prepared even now. They don't have information on their website about how to apply, what they require. And let's remember, Italian consulates overseas are not only a representation or they don't only represent Italian government locally overseas, but also they adapt their guidelines and their approach depending on the socioeconomic country in the country where they are. So they might very well adapt or change or modify or make stricter the policies that are issued at a central level. So today, actually, there's very, very big news that I'm happy to share here with you guys for the very first time. We haven't even published anything on our website because today we found out that the Italian consulate in London has finally issued today the instructions about how to apply for Italian digital nomad visa, what they are asking for, which it's a very good, very interesting, because it's going to give people also some hints about what some other consulate in similar socioeconomic countries with the same socioeconomic situation might be expecting from digital nomad applicants. And so, as I said, they just came out today, and we are working on them. I can definitely share some information. I will do that when we will go through the requirements, because they have added some requirements to the standard requirements provided by the law, which is not unusual for consulates to do. And you are in California, you know better than probably anyone, because there are 2 Italian consulates in California, and each of them has a rather independent approach to how to deal with the visa applications, whatever they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of go into what the requirements are, like who can qualify, and what. Well, let's go through the law first, like what is outlined in the law, and then maybe we'll touch a little bit on the what the London consulate kind of has issued.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. So the law, first of all, makes a distinction that I've seen a ton of information out there about digital nomad visa, and sometimes this is which is crucial information has been missing, which is that the law describes 2 types of categories of applicants. So you can apply for a digital nomad visa for as a self-employed, or as an employee on payroll. So they call it remote worker. They, in the law, specifically in the definition, they list the 2 different categories. So you can be a digital nomad, or you can be a remote worker. Now, we have to keep this in mind, because when the law goes on with the requirements, the law will refer specifically to those definitions when indicating the requirements applying to each category. So even if a self-employed who works overseas is a remote worker, or an employee working overseas is a digital nomad, well, for the purposes of the law, you have to stick to the definition defined or determined by the law. So keeping that in mind, I will refer the same way to digital nomads when we talk to digital nomads, or to remote workers when I refer to employees on payroll, which that is the main distinction. So do you take care of your own benefits and taxes and everything else? Are you self-employed? Do you have your own tax ID as a self-employed, or are you on payroll with a company and they take care of your benefits and taxes and everything else? So that said, there are some requirements that are applied the same way to both categories, and the basic requirement that is definitely something probably the most important one, is that the law requires applicants to have a higher level of education. Higher level of education means that you have to have completed a high school, you have to have a high school diploma and something else. That something else, it's not exactly particularly easy to determine, because it can be something as easy as a bachelor degree from a university or college, or it might be something a little bit more complex, because it might be a diploma or a degree that is issued for a specific licensed professional activity. For example, if you are a real estate agent, in many countries, you don't need a university degree to get a real estate agent license, but you need a license. And so you need a license also in Italy to practice as a real estate agent. So basically, Italian law, through a number of incredibly difficult to follow reference to multiple legislations, one that referring to the next and to the next and to the next. Basically, they are saying if you have a regulated license in your home country or you don't have a university degree, well, that might work as well, as far as you can demonstrate that you have been active for a certain amount of time, that you have experience, and in Italy, there is something corresponding to that license, and that can be matched to it so that you can apply under that definition of highly skilled individual. So as highly skilled is more definition of not necessarily it's basically above high school. That's the basic baseline of highly skilled. Okay, does it make sense so far?
Yes.
Okay, great. So that is, so you prove that through providing education paperwork. So, for example, here comes handy what the Italian consulate in London says on their website. For any information from your like diploma or transcripts or whatever you have that you want to use to prove your skills and your education, if it is not in Italian, or if it was not issued by EU countries, they want a certified Italian translation and apostille. So apostille is a certificate that makes documents valid in Italy, and the certified translation, if they are in Italian, they want a certified translation. Now, for people in the UK, I was already thinking like, okay, so the council says documents that were not issued by European countries. So if someone has a document from a college degree that was issued before Brexit, would that make it a document issued by a European country? For our purposes, it was, but how will they look at it? So, I mean, the difference there is if they don't, you would just need to add a translation and an apostille. That's the main difference. So it's not a huge deal, but better be prepared because you don't want to be turned away because of missing a little formality in a requirement. So they want translation, and we expect actually also other consulates to ask for the translation and apostille requirements, because we've seen that also for other visas. The main requirement for citizenship, for visa, for whatever it is, many times we are seeing consulates asking for that, for the proof of that specific requirement to be certified with a higher level of certification, being apostille, certified translation, stuff like that. Other documents, they usually don't really ask for you to translate them all into Italian, but for the founding requirement, let's say, for the focus requirement, they might. So we expect that to be a common requirement from all consulates, or almost all consulates around the world. And then if you are an employee on payroll, or if you want to move as an employee on payroll, you can do that. Many people think that you have to have a contract already existing, but it is not the case. The important is to have a contract that will start at least or not later than the start date of the visa that you put on your application. So when you apply for a visa, you enter in the application what is your date of entry. So you would like to go to Italy. There's a specific field that says when you want to go to Italy. They say, I want to go to Italy June 1st. And so they want you to have an employment contract starting not later than June 1st. So it can start earlier, but not later. So it can be a contract that is not already existing, but they want to see that contract. If you are self-employed, well, as self-employed, we expect the consulates to ask for some evidence, some track record of letters of engagement or relationship with clients who have used your services in the past. So to prove that you have been acting in the field for which you are applying the visa. Okay. Any questions so far about this?
No, do you anticipate kind of a loose, I'm just thinking through many entrepreneurs don't have college degrees and have been doing business for, a long time. Is there going to be any way, and may not have certifications outside of, literally maybe some junior college or something. But so I'm just kind of curious, does that disqualify someone if they're an entrepreneur who has a fully remote business, and can
Yeah,
support themselves, but don't have that particular piece of documentation?
that is such a good question, Shannon. So I've had already several people turned off by the letter of the norm and the interpretation that the requirement about the education background is there. So there's definitely going to be some flexibility. However, as I said, this is a has always been traditionally a politicized topic, highly politicized topic, because it has to do with immigration, labor, and it's a very sensitive topic. So um, it is very possible that many consulates will be extremely strict about it. The law says that you have to have evidence of something. So evidence of a college degree or a license, basically. So they don't ask they don't ask that a certain amount of time that you must have had that license, but evidence that you have worked in that area, that you have work experience. So, however, many consulates might require that you have had a license for a certain amount of time along with the experience. And unfortunately, as much as it might sound unfair or unreasonable, this is a bureaucratic matter, and reason many times has very little to do with bureaucracy. Unfortunately, if they cannot put the check on the box,
Mhm.
I'm afraid that people, very, very successful self-employed entrepreneurs might not qualify. Like if you're a very successful, I don't know, marketing consultant or YouTube freelancer, and
Mhm.
you don't fall in any category that will allow you to get that type of education or professional label that would be comparable to something similar existing in Italy, then you might be just disqualified, might not qualify for the visa, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of something that people did not see coming, but they had to put um, some borders, some limits to people applying for this. In my opinion, they could have raised and you get to another requirement, they could have raised the minimum income that people will bring it in. So they put the threshold to approximately like 28,000 euros as the minimum income you have to prove. Well, they could have raised that and being a little bit more lenient on the form a bureaucratic piece of paper, because at the end of the day, you might have someone who has just left the university with very little experience who would not provide any significant, added value to the Italian economic um, scenario, but actually, as evidence of their success, they bring evidence of significant sales and income in that field. So, because at the end of the day, we know that income is an indicator of success nowadays, more than a license or university degree, way more than that. So, but that's the way it is now, unfortunately. So, and we are still working on seeing how consulates will approach uh, I don't want to say creative options, but interpretation of those requirements. For example, for some other visas, we have seen that when they ask for a requirement and a person is obvious that would fit perfectly into the reason why that visa is there for, we've seen sometimes consulate being more flexible in their evaluation of the application, just because it was so overwhelmingly obvious that so they made it work. However, there are some consulates sometimes that are just more strict about the interpretation of norm, and they will just stick to that box. If they cannot check that box, they will not go ahead, unfortunately.
Okay.
Okay.
So besides, you mentioned the requirements as far as the self-employed and the remote employee, and you briefly touched on income requirements. What are the other requirements going into and to apply for this?
Sure. So there is the health insurance. You have to have health insurance, private health insurance, which is it's very easy to get. If you don't have health insurance covering Italy, you can shop online, find one. We have seen that there are options for, depending on your age, can be anything between 350, 600, 700 euros a year, because they don't want you to have a full coverage for whatever possible could happen to you in Italy, but just some minimum requirements. So it's very easy, also pretty quick to get one. Also, they want proof of housing. So you were mentioning earlier, owning a home doesn't entitle you automatically to a visa. However, it makes any visa application much easier. So if you own a property, that's great. If you don't own a property, many people think, oh, I will just file an application when I'm under contract. That will not unfortunately work. They want you to see that you have the property in your name, unless you agree in the purchase offer under contract that you have early possession. So basically, there is a purchase offer with attached, basically a lease agreement. As an alternative, you could have a lease agreement. Now, two things I wanted to mention about the property purchase and the lease agreement. So, property purchase, people usually are work on visa, and when they're buying a property, they try to time it in a way that they don't have to do a lease, because they will have they will be owners. So people schedule close a few days before the time when they have to apply for the visa, so they can show that they have purchased a home. Just bear in mind that between closing and when you actually will have your registered purchase contract, usually it might go as much as 1 month, just because the way the bureaucracy of registering deeds and property purchase contracts and stuff like that. So a way to avoid being stuck in that month of limbo, what you can do is at closing, you can ask the Italian notary or whomever is assisting you for closing for a notary certificate of completion, where the notary actually says, today in front of me, person X and person Y have completed this purchase, the sale of this property. So now the official owner is this person. The official registered deed will follow. That can be done. Some consulates will accept that because the notary is a government representative, and there is a way for the notary to issue this type of certificate in a way that satisfies consulates. So just mention that to the notary a few days prior to closing, because so that it can make it happen on closing. Now, for a lease agreement, consulates, many times they have this on their websites, but also it is not rare for consulate not to mention this on their website. A lease agreement in Italy, by law, has to be recorded, it has to be registered and filed with Italian tax authorities. So the law says whenever there is a lease agreement to enter into, the landlord has to file the lease agreement with the tax authorities. It is a way to, for a number of reasons. They say it is to protect the rights of the tenants, but it is also to make sure that the landlord pays their taxes on the lease agreement. So even there, it might take a few days to register a lease agreement. Now it's much easier to register a lease agreement. Doesn't imply any extra taxes, meaning it is mandatory by law. There are some taxes to be paid for the lease registration, but they are not significant at all. And if you see that the landlord is hesitant or doesn't know how to do it, also the tenant can take care of it. So if you are working with someone, they could do the registration on your behalf and have it done, so that when you file the lease agreement with the consulate, you file also the registration, which makes that official, that stamp of the tax office. And this is another interesting part. People think, oh, I need to provide proof of housing. And the law doesn't say this. Consulate, and for this, London consulate confirmed what we expected. Depending on the visa you're applying, the proof of housing, it can be as informal as a letter of hospitality, and it might be as strict as proof of ownership. So we expected for this visa to be a lease agreement in your name or property ownership, and that's the case confirmed by the Italian consulate in London. So what does lease agreement mean? It can be also just a room in an apartment. So if you wanted to rent a room in Milan, as far as it is a registered file lease agreement for that room, that's fine. It doesn't have to be, the whole apartment, the whole house in your name.
Okay. I do have some follow-up questions on that.
Sure.
Just I can anticipate, and I'm not going through the questions yet, but so the lease agreement should be for the entire duration of the visa, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so
It must be for the entire visa, duration of the visa from the date, once again, the visa starts on the application.
okay, so if someone wanted to maybe spend 3 months here, 4 months there, and kind of go around in Italy, do you foresee that being possible? If they could put kind of short-term or medium-term leases in place, or do you think it's going to be required to be, this is the kind of a semi-permanent residency for you during the entire?
Sure. And yes, definitely. Now, as someone brought up with me, well, this is a digital nomad. This is a nomad visa. So, like, why do we want to stick a person for a year to one place when the definition of being a nomad is to explore and travel around? That's absolutely right. Makes sense. However, once again, the law requires for the proof of housing, and the consulates are interpreting it that you need to provide proof of housing for the entire duration of the visa. Now, to answer your question, though, if it is possible to do to not to be stuck in the same place for the entire duration. How do you do that? So many times people will just make a sign a lease agreement for a property that is in the area where they believe they will be. Many times the timing is not even conducive to really sign an agreement for the place where you will eventually be. Like, usually people want to go explore, scout out the area, and then make their decision about where they want to commit to stay really longer. However, regardless of that, you can make a 12 years agreement with a clause in it where you can break the lease within 3 months, 4 months. That's perfectly legal. It's perfectly legal to have a lease agreement with an early termination clause in it. As far as the landlord is in agreement with it, you can even add a penalty, early termination penalty to make the landlord happy, and then you can get the visa, you can get the lease, the official lease or the permanent lease, if you will, somewhere else. Now, what happens if you don't want to really have a 1 year lease ever? Well, it's a little bit more of a unusual scenario, but there are people who might have that mindset. So in that scenario, you would have to just focus your attention for a second on the bureaucracy involved with what happens after you get the visa, because the visa is just one step in a larger scenario involving bureaucracy and life-changing decisions. So let me touch real quickly to the 3 steps that are involved when you go to Italy. The first step is you apply for the visa at the consulate level in your country where you live. Then you go to Italy, and within 8 days, you just file an application for the immigration permit. So the immigration permit is filed in Italy with the local immigration office. You file a folder filled with documents, many of which are the same exact documents you had filed at the consulate level. And then you wait. You will get a message or a letter where they tell you, oh, in 9 months, in 8 months, show up for your to be fingerprinted, and then we will take care of you, process your immigration permit. And then after 2 more months, you will get your actual immigration permit. So we have the visa, we have the immigration permit application, which it usually takes anything between 6 to 8 months, 9 months to be processed. And then finally, once you get that, you apply for your residency registration at a township level, comune. You know, in Italy, there's the word comune, means township, basically. And there are almost 8,000 townships in Italy. So when you finally get your immigration card in hands, which is kind of a plastic card like a driver's license, you then can apply for residency. So you have plenty of time, really, to move around and live in Italy wherever you want. And then when you finally get you can change home address if you want. And to make sure that the Italian immigration office stays in touch with you, just elect an alternative domicile where you want to receive your immigration paperwork. So many times when we work for our clients on these type of matters, we have, instead of their home address, we have our office address as their domicile for communications. Also because many times people travel, people want to go back to their home country to fix, to take care of their estate planning or other affairs, and they want to make sure that important correspondence gets monitored. So basically, once the immigration permit is finally issued, you can settle in a comune, register as a resident, and if you want, you just have residency there. You can then travel somewhere else if you want to. But yeah, you don't have to live in the same place all the time.
Okay. Okay. So going back to the qualifications, are there any other qualifications prior to knowing whether or not you are a
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So there is one that is also I read conflicting information on the web. It's about background check.
That's right.
The good news is that the law does not require the applicant's background check. Also, it wouldn't make a ton of sense to expect an Italian background check on someone who wants to move to Italy. What the law actually says is they want an affidavit, only for employees, by the way, not for self-employed. They want an affidavit from the employer through which the employer declares that the employer has never been convicted with an immigration crime. So, because many people are very concerned, well, I have some minor priors, or how do I get the criminal background certificate or check? Well, applicants shouldn't worry, except for the case where at a consular level, they decide to ask for a criminal background check of the applicant. Now, when could that happen? Well, there are some consulates that just do it. They just ask for it regardless. For example, we know that San Francisco Italian consulate will ask for a US background check on the applicant for the elective residency visa, whereas there's no other consulates that I can think of asks for that, not even the one in Los Angeles, which is within the same state. So it's not that San Francisco is necessarily more dangerous, or perhaps it is, I don't know, but you know what I mean? So, but no other consulates in the US asks for an FBI criminal background check on the applicant for an active residency visa. So what I'm saying is the law doesn't ask for it. The only thing the law asks for is a criminal affidavit or an affidavit about criminal background from the employee. However, don't be surprised if some consulate, depending where you are, where you live, might ask for your criminal check certificate.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other qualifications or?
Going through my list real quick, just make sure that I covered everything. Think, yeah. So, okay, this is interesting. So, they ask for proof of income. So they ask for this. I mentioned earlier, proof of income. So some people are asking, does it have to be income related to the work that I am willing to do and under which I'm applying? Well, the law doesn't say that, and it is not. We don't expect consulates to necessarily ask for that the income to be related to the industry for which you are claiming high skills. However, it is possible. It is a possibility. So if you are in a situation where your income earned through the skills under which you're applying is lower than roughly 28,000 euros, probably would be good to talk with an expert to see how to better present your application. And then here it is, another requirement that is kind of we had in our expectations. It's not in the law. The travel evidence of travel reservations. Sometimes some consulates ask for evidence of a flight reservation, or depending where you are, if you're in the UK, they might ask for the Eurotunnel reservation if you travel by car, things like that. So some consulates around the world will ask for the travel reservation in your name. Some will ask especially for a one-way visa, for a one-way flight or reservation, rather than return ticket for a one-year visa like this. And the consulate in London, in their instructions, they are asking for a one-way ticket reservation in the name of the applicant for the digital nomad visa. So there's, so our recommendation usually, what I'm trying to say here is that aside from what you might expect based on the law, and also looking at the requirements for other visas that are listed on the consulate of your jurisdiction, the Italian consulate of the competent for your jurisdiction, our recommendation is always to prepare a kind of a backup list of documents that we always recommend. For example, there is nowhere listed that you should provide evidence of tax returns for this visa in the Italian consulate of London or in the law. However, we have seen that several consulates have asked for that either through their website instructions, or as a first strike, when you apply, they will let you know, okay, yeah, I know that we have that on the website, but we also want this. And you can file additional information via email, but it's just annoying because if you knew, you would just file it at once, because it's pretty easy to file your tax return. And yes, they are very sensitive information documents, but people will file it if they know that that's a requirement. So we recommend that you, even if your consulate doesn't ask for travel reservation proof, if they don't ask for proof of tax return, some consulate asks for the past 3 years of taxes. Obviously, if you have filed an extension, if you're in the US, you will give the 3 years that you have filed. And then you will go with as much documentation as it will be reasonable to expect as a backup, just to be thorough. That's our recommendation usually, especially if you want to have the first shot to be successful.
Okay. Can I get a clarification on the roughly 28,000 euro is that per person? So say someone's coming over with either a spouse or a partner, even children. Are there other additional requirements above that for parties included? Or does that visa even include multiple people?
That's a very good question. So it's for this visa, they're not talking about that. However, it is only reasonable to expect that they are going to ask for an increase if you are bringing along some people, because this visa expressly gives entitlement to family unification as they call it. So usually what you can safely estimate or plan for is 20% for spouse or civil union partner, and about 5% more for any minor child. If it is an adult dependent child, which is also possible, so 18 or older, but it's still dependent, you will count 20%. That's usually our rule of thumb. based on the approach adopted on other visas. And I didn't say this in my introduction, but we work with all consulates around the world, and so we tend to give our clients conservative approach to when putting together applications. So if you plan on adding 20% for a spouse, 5% for a child, usually that is sufficient. However, there are some consulates that are extremely strict. And for example, the LA consulate, the Italian consulate in LA, is when it comes to monetary requirements, they just ask for simple multiplication for the number of people who are coming along. So some consulates might ask for that 28,000 to be times two if you're going with your spouse, and even if the spouse is based on on family reasons. So, and by the way, something important talking about spouses and other people who will go with you, our recommendation in that case is to make sure that if you're doing a lease agreement, their names is also on the lease agreement. Although it is not required at a civil law level for a lease agreement to reflect all the people, the occupants of that unit. However, we have seen in the past the person coming to us after they had been rejected the visa because one of the spouses was not on the lease. And we said, well, if we think that you've been rejected for that reason, so instead of filing an appeal, which is expensive, time consuming, we recommend just pretend you never filed it, file again with a redone lease agreement. And they did that and they got the visa. As I said, sometimes you get a consulate representative who just is a bureaucrat, and they don't have any way to check that box, or they don't want to, I don't know, put together the marriage certificate to the applicant, and just they will just deny it. And going back to, since we were talking about housing, I was thinking that might be interesting because many people have asked, like, what if I have a combination of Airbnbs booked like throughout the process, throughout the year? Like I have 3 months here, 2 months there, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there. Not only this would not be acceptable because of the letter of the norm that right now, I mean, an extensive and very flexible interpretation might lead to that, but we expect consulates not to accept that. And in some of the website consulates for other similar visas, 1-year visa, they expressly say that a combination of multiple contracts will not make it. They want to see, in case of at least a 12-month term. Okay. You can break it, as I said. It's not a big deal. You can even never move to that home, for that matter. For example, you can sign a lease for a place, and then you go to Italy, actually on an Airbnb, and find the place you like, move there, rescind the contract with the original lease that you had filed in your application, and sign another 1-year contract that you will use for the application of the permit, and the second stage I was mentioning earlier. So sometimes people do that because they just have to satisfy the housing requirement with a piece of paper that is registered that proves the Italian consulate your ability to put a roof on your head, basically.
Okay. So let's move on to the actual process. You have to apply at the consulate that is in your jurisdiction, correct? Within your country. Is that by appointment only? What are the kind of the timing? Like, is it?
Yes.
How long does that take? What are we seeing?
Yeah. So we've seen at this point for the digital Nomad visa, we've seen the wildest variety of approaches from the consulates. Now, the first one who saw coming out today also addresses this aspect. Now, what we have been telling people so far is whenever they will come out with the instructions, expect a little bit longer time to process this visa because it's so new. It's so new. Some consulates are even saying, don't apply now because we're still getting our act together. We're still understanding, figuring it out how to approach this and what to ask you for. So the London consulate is saying that the processing time is going to be 90 days. And it is very unusual for them to say this because this reflects exactly what the law says. The law says that for a visa, the maximum time is 90 days, but extremely rarely a consulate will take 90 days. We're seeing actually recently, after the backlog due to COVID, understaffing and stuff like that, actually consulates have been pretty good at issuing visas much more quickly than in the past. So London consulate is already saying, hell, hold on a second, be prepared. It's going to take a while. Let us do our job. It's going to take about 90 days. And they're saying, hold on a second, because if you're self-employed, it might take even longer, up to 120 days. They don't say why or how that would work also in the eyes of the law that says that within 90 days you have to get it done. However, they are, I believe, already foreseeing the complications deriving from the evaluation of a self-employment situation where you don't have a easy contract signed by an employer hiring you. So they would have to probably work more on a ad hoc, case-by-case evaluation of how you demonstrate your expertise in the field and the fact that you have enough work, you're busy enough that you will not be a burden for the system in Italy. So there is where we see the difference, because actually for certain documents, it should be easier for a self-employed. There is no affidavit for criminal record, and there is no contract to be reviewed. But exactly why, or because there's not a contract from an employer, it would be harder, I think, for a consulate to appreciate a self-employed track record, let's say. So and also the predictability of that self-employed or self-employment to continue remotely. So probably they are still figuring out what are the parameters that the Italian consulates will want to be satisfied for self-employed people. Like what are they going to expect from you? As I was saying earlier, engagement letters, letter recommendations from clients. We've seen this for some visas. They ask for letter of recommendation from banks, from accountants. Perhaps they might ask for 3 letters from 3 institutional clients, or clients that are corporations, or clients who they can call and verify what you're saying. They could ask for that very easily. That would be within the discretional definition or the definition of the discretional powers.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So, and that's important to know, especially when we are applying for the visa and trying to determine a date when you're going to be starting, or even looking at a rental contract. It's not something that's going to be happening overnight. You need to make sure that you're kind of planning this all out.
That's a very good point, Shannon. That's a very good point. Many people say, how do I rent a place starting in 3 months? Who in their right mind will give me a place and not collect rent for 3 months, or put even on the market 3 months early a place? Like, how do I do this? Say, unfortunately, the crude reality is that you're going to throw out the window some money in rent. That's just it. That's just it. So you might want to just start renting, and I wouldn't say move your stuff or whatever until you have the visa necessarily, but you might just rent a place, sign a lease agreement, and it doesn't have to, just know it doesn't have to be the place where you will actually live. It doesn't have to be furnished either. It doesn't even have to have any utility attached. They don't ask for the lease to be, so you could literally have an empty apartment, even for 300 euros a month, for that matter. It doesnn't matter. It's a piece of paper. So even if you throw out of the window, I don't know, 2-3 months, it shouldn't be the end of the world. It's annoying, obviously, because it's a waste of money. But at least if there is an early termination clause and you get denied, get rejected at the visa application, at least you can cut your losses, and you're buying your freedom to choose later a better place that you like, in the area that you like, and then you move at that point your furniture, your belongings only once, and that will save you a ton of time and money later.
Okay. So we mentioned that this visa is going to be a 1-year visa. Is it renewable and or convertible into another type of visa?
So it is definitely renewable. It is a 1-year visa. It is renewable every year. And obviously what you renew technically is not the visa, is the permit, because let's remember, you get the visa, then you get the permit. Once you get the permit, the visa is gone. You only work on a permit level, and you can renew it if you have registered as a resident. So you are a resident. So since you are a resident, you are entitled to deal with the Italian authorities in Italy, no longer with the ones overseas.
Good.
So, and you wouldn't be able to if you had a permit. So within 60 days, actually, not later than 60 days after, before the expiration date of the original permit, you apply for the renewal. Now, I said earlier that a permit might take even 10, even 11 months to be issued. So sometimes people will renew for the permesso, for the permit, before they even have the first one in their hands. It's just the way time bureaucracy works. I know, exactly. Let's laugh about it because it's otherwise we'll lose our mind. So you bring the Italian authorities, the comune, or actually the immigration office, the receipt. Hey, I'm still waiting for you to process my first immigration permit. In the meantime, I already put in my request for renewal because you will issue a outdated permit. Many times people get home with their first permit that expires like 2 weeks after they've been able to pick it up, which is whatever it is. So you renew it, and after 5 years of residency, we expect you can apply for a permanent permit for 5 years. So can it be converted? Now, I haven't seen anything specific about this visa being possible to convert into something else, but I don't see why it shouldn't. And it should fall under the standard category of conversions. I expect you to be able to convert it into, you wouldn't need, let's say, when would a conversion become necessary? Let's say if you decide not to work anymore, so you cannot satisfy the requirement of income and anymore, that type of income anymore. But however, you could convert it to an elective residency visa if you don't want to work. Or you could renew it even if you don't work, because if you have proof of income, which is passive income, and the proof of income they are asking for right now is not specifically, as I said earlier, for the industry under which you are applying for the visa. So, but for situations regarding like conversions are usually are dealt in a very custom manner also locally by the local immigration offices. So what I usually recommend is check the local policy. So when people come to us, we'll usually advise them depending on the area where they are in the country.
Okay. I have one last question, then there's a list of a lot of questions that we'll try and get through as many as we can. I know this is a very popular subject, but what are the tax implications? Like, what should someone be thinking about going into planning to apply for this visa? The tax implications once you're in Italy for a year, obviously it's, and maybe specifically to US citizens, because some countries don't have double taxation, but can you touch a little bit on that, or what?
Sure.
What we
sure.
should
Yeah, sure. As I said, when you get the visa, it might be a situation where it's just a piece of a larger life-changing plan, life-change plan, and so definitely taxes are important. So when you go to Italy to work, and you work in Italy, your income, depending on how you earn your income, will be treated differently. So, for example, in most cases, and especially with the US, but in most cases, whenever there is a treaty against double taxation, especially with Western countries, between Italy and Western countries, the general rule is for the employment income, self-employment income, to be taxed only in the country of where you live. So that means that in the country of origin, you should not be taxed based on the treaty. And if your local accountant tells you otherwise, make sure that they have looked at the treaty. So you were asking specifically for U.S. citizens. Yes, citizens. I speak now as a U.S. citizen, not as a U.S. attorney, because I'm not licensed in the U.S. But U.S. citizens have to file taxes for life. And until they have citizenship, right? Regardless where they live, it's one of the very few countries. There are only 2 countries in the world that ask for that. However, there's also an exemption at a domestic level in the US for foreign individuals up to a certain amount of income and earned overseas. You don't have to pay taxes in the US. At a treaty level between Italy and the US, however, that extension becomes unlimited, meaning the extension applies to all the income that you earn in Italy. It is only taxed in Italy. So additionally, on top of that, Italy offers significant tax incentives for people who move to Italy, who have never lived in Italy, and to people who either start a small business or have a small business. So if you are moving to Italy as an employee or self-employed, you now can enjoy a 50% income tax exclusion, regardless where you move in Italy. You know, some tax programs only benefit you if you move to certain regions of Italy, certain towns. There's a 50% employment tax exclusion wherever you go to Italy for up to 5 years and up to 600,000 euros of income. So that is already pretty interesting. In Italy, you file individually. So even if you're married, you file individually. And if you have other income, however, you would have to look at the specific regulations under the treaty. For example, if you have rental income in your home country, the general rule for tax treaties that Italy has signed is that rental income is taxed in the country where the real estate is located first. And then if the Italian taxes are higher, you pay the difference in Italy. And some of the tax programs for small businesses up to 85,000 euros, so roughly $93,000, you can opt for flat tax that goes outside of the Italian brackets. Italian brackets are pretty short brackets with high rates compared to the US. So to give you an example, the regular brackets up to 28,000 euros are roughly, you pay up roughly 25% between city, regional, and national tax. And above 28,000 up to 50,000 euros, you pay 37% approximately tax. And then above 50,000 euros, you pay 45.5, 46% income tax. Whereas for small business, if you have a small business or you start a new business and don't make more than 85,000 euros a year, you can apply for a flat tax where you basically can pay anything, or let's say, depending on the circumstances, 4% on the totality of your sales or 10%, roughly. Maybe you just very simple, like simplification of how it works, but it is very enticing because, unless, once again, if you have a very successful business, that wouldn't apply. You would go within the brackets, but the 50% tax exclusion would help because then all your income will be cut in half. So that's for taxes. And you asked another question, but it's slipping my mind right now.
No, that was basically, yeah. I mean, taxes can be in a whole rabbit hole. So it's, yes, you're going to, if you're there for over 183 days, you're going to have to file in Italy, get a good cross-border tax account, right?
Yeah, exactly. And some people think that the 180 days is really the cutoff, but it's actually not, especially if you keep your home in the US. Okay. And especially if you have in the US most of your income and assets and family relations, it is possible that you might spend most of the time in Italy, but actually you might not be, it might be even registered as a resident at the comune level, but you might not be considered an Italian tax resident. Okay. So because of the treaty. The treaty says that you are a tax resident of the country that defines you as such. But if you spend 2 months in the US and the rest of the year in Italy, both countries at a domestic level will claim your tax residency. So the tax treaty says, okay, both countries claim tax residency. Let's see how to resolve it. And they say, okay, let's see where that person has a home available to her or to him. Well, that person has a home available in each country. Okay, then they go on with the tie-break rules, they call it. The next tie-break rule for Americans is, let's see where that person has the center of vital interests. So that is personal and financial relations. So if you have really your spouse or children or like most of your family personal relations in the US, and also most of your assets, bank accounts, investments in the US, you only have in Italy something that represents a minor part of your interests, well, you might claim that actually you kept your tax residence in the US and be completely tax-free in Italy. So it is not common, but we have clients who are in that position.
Okay. Okay, let's start getting to some questions. I know you have a hard stop, so I will do 10 minutes of questions. I'll get through as many as we can. There was a couple questions around, I own my own company, but I'm also a W-2 employee of my company. Should I apply as a digital nomad, or should I apply as a remote worker employee?
That's a very good question. Well, I would definitely say, as an employee, as things stand, based on what we have seen as an employee, because as, for example, just to give an idea, the London consulate will process more quickly, more easily. There's a contract there, an employment contract. It should be easier. Now, there might be other circumstances in your specific situation in your business that might dictate otherwise, but in general, I would expect in a situation like this, which is not uncommon, we probably recommend file as an employee.
Okay. Okay. I'm just going to go through. A lot of these have been answered as we go along. So I'm going to try and get to the ones that are, and
Yeah, and no, also to add that, obviously it sounds complicated, and probably it is complicated. However, this is just one of the many visas that are out there. And so when you discuss this with your situation with someone who has worked on hundreds of visa, is just another visa. So once again, it might, like, to bring up the example you mentioned earlier, the question you mentioned earlier, there might be tax reasons why you might want to apply as a W-2 instead of as an employee, because you might want to access those tax advantages or tax programs that are only available to self-employed people, like the 5%, the 10% I was mentioning earlier. So it really depends. Like having the guidance you mentioned, a cross-border accounting, cross-border attorney, that's definitely going to bring clarity to your case. Plus, we are talking about all possible scenarios right now. So when we talk with the client, obviously we narrowly focused on their specific situation. So we don't just talk about all the possible range of possibilities out there.
yeah. There was a question around a lease agreement. What if someone has family there and they're staying with family? What kind of documentation is that possible? And what kind of documentation would be needed for that?
So our expectation is to still that the consulates will still request a registered lease agreement, even if it is to stay with family. And that's just because of the nature of the visa. It is just just to give you an idea, a lease agreement will cost very little to a family member. Whatever they charge, they will be taxed 21% on that income, and that's pretty much it. But our recommendation, if you're applying for this visa, get a lease agreement signed and registered. Do not try otherwise. Also, because the London consulate has said these are the two options for housing requirements. I mean, there are so many for other visas. I'm not even listing them here, but they pinpointed their requirement: ownership or registered lease agreement. And we usually tell clients just focus on that rather than spending time and energy on trying to make a letter of hospitality work and stuff like that, because it doesn't, it's not worth it.
Okay.
Choose your battles. Choose your battles.
Gotcha. There were a couple of questions around leaving Italy. Are there any restrictions around how many days you must spend in Italy during that 1-year visa?
Yes.
Or
Yes. So the general rule applies here. They don't want you to spend more than they want you to spend in Italy at least 1 day every 6 months. So because this would be a 1-year lease, so they want you to not to be away from Italy for more than 6 months in a row. So So if you are more time than that outside the country, they might deny your renewal. To just make sure that every 6 months you spend some time in Italy.
Okay, that makes sense. I expected it to be a lot less than that. So, like,
Yeah, I know.
forgiving.
Surprisingly, is not that is not more than that. Other countries are much stricter than that.
We touched a little bit on, can this lead to citizenship eventually? Yeah.
Yeah, if you are registered for 10 years, you can claim citizenship, or if you have Italian ancestry and the line of blood was broken, you actually can get that 3 years of residency will fix that. So if, for example, your grandfather or grandmother moved to the US, naturalized, and then gave birth to your parent, you cannot apply for citizenship. You are not an Italian citizen, the law says. You cannot apply for Italian citizenship recognition, zero, because when they naturalized, they lost, because of the law at that time, they lost Italian citizenship. So when they gave birth, gave birth not as Italian citizens, so your parent didn't receive Italian citizenship. By being in Italy, you for 3 years as registered resident at Comune, you are entitled to fix that link and claim citizenship by naturalization instead of after 10 years of being in Italy, after only 3 years. So it's basically a fast track for people of Italian descent who have spent in Italy 3 years as registered residents. Yeah.
And just on a personal note, does that apply to 1948 cases as well?
1948 case, yeah. I mean, so you have a 1948 case with a broken link. My goodness, is that?
No, I don't have a broken link. I have a 1948 case with my father.
Oh, you can apply tomorrow if you wanted to. Like, you can apply because basically it is a litigation case. Is that you file? You just sign a proxy from the U.S. to an Italian attorney. They file an appeal on your behalf in court, and the court will give you the Italian citizenship based on the recognition of the unconstitutional conflict with the 1948 case. So you can get citizenship. You don't have to live in Italy, basically, the bottom line.
Okay. Let's see. We've got 1 more minute. Sorry, there's so many questions.
That's okay.
Which is expected, right?
Yeah, and we are updating constantly. We have a digital nomad guide on our website, and we constantly update it. We will keep monitoring what Italian consulates are not only posting out there, because unfortunately, this is something very important I want to share. What Italian consulates have out there in terms of instructions, information, is not always up to date, is not always 100% reflecting their policies. Even consulate representatives change over time. So it is essential to look at, as much as possible to try to understand how the consulate is actually interpreting what they are putting out there. If they have any information, not all consulates will post about this. Many consulates don't have instructions about visas at all. So what people can do is see what the approach of that consulate is with respect to other visas. An indication could be to look at how they deal with the elective residency visa, if they have information about that, or talk with an expert. That's obviously, as I was saying earlier, moving to Italy is part of a global plan. There's a ton of there are a ton of implications in terms of estate planning, tax planning, medical directive. There's so much that our recommendation is, yes, you can laser focus on getting that visa, but then once you get to Italy, you realize that you left behind so much housework that is so much harder to take care when you are in Italy. So when you transition to another country, it's important to also look at the consequences of it, as I was saying, state of tax level for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, I thank you for your time. I know this is a hot topic. It is also brand new. It's literally changing by the day. Like you said, just this morning, London released some additional requirements. It's fluid. So it's really important for everybody to understand that everyone is learning as we go. And that as with everything with Italy, it takes time and patience. It does seem a little bit complicated, but if it's really something that you want to do, there's a way to do it, right? I am putting your contact information, the website, and everything in the comments. I will also follow up with everybody with this recording as well as the contact information. You also take consultation appointments, so I encourage anyone with specific questions to do that. Thank you so much for your time. Everything was so valuable. I appreciate it. And thank you everybody for being on. I hope you've at least got a little glimpse of what this new digital nomad visa is all about. And that's with that. I'm gonna wrap it up.
Thank you for having
Thanks,
us.
everybody.
Thank you.
Again, I'll put the contact in the comments and you'll get this via email as well.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for
Thanks.
listening. Bye-bye.